Let me share my screen again. Thank you everybody for joining us for this inaugural Texas Smart Cities series. We're really happy to bring you this series. It is the outgrowth of two other activities. One is the coming together of the large cities in Texas to create the Texas Smart Cities Summit. The other is the Austin Smart City Alliance, formerly Austin City Up, had created a seminar series that it promoted to its members that were generally in Austin or maybe by extension in other places of their company locations. And so we've merged these efforts in these times to make sure that we are presenting information on a regular cadence. Now it's called the Texas Smart City Series. The word Texas in there should absolutely make you think that multiple stakeholders in Texas are coming together to bring you this series. And that's absolutely true. We have people from Houston, San Antonio, Dallas, and Austin, and we welcome smart cities people from every city in Texas to be part of this effort and part of planning our annual summit as well. If you're interested, type that in the chat window, and we look forward to working with you on this series and for the annual, probably biannual now, summits, or twice annual. In addition, though, you should not think of the word Texas in this title as being the nature of the speakers. We aim to present national and global speakers as well as Texas projects in this series. We want to make sure that we are accelerating the awareness, the advocacy, and the adoption of smart cities techniques. And these are challenging problems to solve, as our speaker is going to talk about today. We need to be persistent. We need to push. We need to have some perseverance, and we need to constantly bring new technologies and new expertise into the efforts. So we'll be doing this twice monthly on the second and fourth Wednesdays of the month. It's at 12 to 1 Central Time, so it's kind of the lunch and learn format for those of you in Central Time Zone, but it is absolutely open to anyone from any time zone, anywhere in the world. And in fact, we hope you will use the chat window to self-introduce, say who you are, who you're with, what your interest in smart cities in, maybe provide a LinkedIn link or email. We want you to get to know each other and know who the other people are that you can count on that are helping to drive smart cities efforts forward. So please feel free to use the chat window to self-introduce. Also share where in the world you're connecting from. We know a lot of you will be in Texas, but we're certainly hopeful that we see connections from other places around the country and even world, and we hope to watch that grow as this series rolls out. We have some great upcoming sessions as well. Jordan Davis from Smart Columbus is going to talk about their Smart Columbus and smart mobility efforts. They were the big winner, which pains me a little to say since Austin was one of the finalists. They were the big winner in the U.S. Department of Transportation $50 million award a few years ago. Very excited to have Jordan speak to us in 2 weeks. 2 weeks after that, Ruth B. Yesner from IDC is going to talk about growing smart cities, how this market is actually big, even though it's hard to pin down for some people. It's actually a very large market and growing, and there are many drivers to why it will continue to grow. And then on March 10th, we're super excited to have Emily Yates to present the Smart Philadelphia efforts. Not listed on here, on March 24th, Steven Steinberg is going to talk about his AI-powered chatbot that's already in use in Prosper, Texas, and in Houston, Texas. So we've got the next 4 of these planned. We hope you will join us for these as we continue to plan more of these. I want to introduce Charlie Catlett now. Charlie is a senior research scientist at the Discovery Partners Institute at the University of Illinois, which is also his alma mater. And it's also where he worked when I met him long ago when he was working at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications. I'm not quite sure how long I've known Charlie, but I'm pretty sure it's 20 plus years, probably.
25.
Might be getting close to, yeah, might be getting close to 3 on the front. We've known each other for a long time. He's a very talented and passionate technology professional and leader, and I consider him a great friend as well. So I'm super excited he was able to kick off this series. Very grateful to him. You probably have heard of him in his Smart Cities role. He led the NSF-funded Array of Things Urban Sensing Project. It is a wonderful showcase project for the power and potential of distributed sensor networks and using AI and advanced data analytics capabilities there. And as I mentioned, he was also part of the world famous National Center for Supercomputing Applications. It was founded in 1985, I believe, and it was easily the most famous academic supercomputing center in the world in those days. And if you remember tools like NCSA Telnet or NCSA Mosaic, they really developed a lot of the tools that led to people accessing resources on the internet and accessing web pages on the internet. So Charlie has a long history. Today, he's going to talk about edge computing for artificially intelligent cities. So I've included a snippet of the summary on here. I hope you've had a chance to check out the webpage and read the whole, but now I'm going to turn it over to Charlie. So let me stop my share and cut my camera off and turn it over to you, Charlie. Welcome.
Thank you, Jay. You know, they say that friends come and go and enemies accumulate. Jay is an example of the fact that friends accumulate too. You'll notice from my profile picture that I don't always look like the Unabomber. It's just I don't want to go to the barber until we're vaccinated. So I want to spend some time and just kind of tell you not just what we've been doing in Chicago, but why we've been doing it, some of the lessons that we've learned. And I want to build enough time in so that you can have a chance to ask questions, probe on any topic you'd like, because as you can imagine, working on something for almost a decade, it's hard to pack all of the lessons learned, both good and bad experiences into even a multi-hour talk, much less 45 minutes or so. So let me share my screen here. And I think you can see that, right?
Yes.
I'm going to open the chat window again as well, if I can. It's disappeared somewhere on one of my screens. Well, I guess I won't open the chat window, but if you want to put a question in there, maybe one of the organizers can queue those up. So as Jay said, I'm from the Discovery Partners Institute. It's a new institute that's in Chicago, formed by the University of Illinois system. I joined last March. My first day in the office was a Monday. I went to a workshop for 3 days. I was going to come back on Friday for my second day in the office, and we went virtual. So I've been working with a group that's grown from about 8 people to 30 people in that time as we have been ramping up this institute, which exists with a $500 million capital investment from the state of Illinois in order to do research and development and to address the talent gap that we have in cities like Chicago and elsewhere between the tech jobs that are available and the workers that can actually fill them. So there's a training aspect of DPI and as well a research and development and a third focus on economic development, helping students and faculty members, not just from the University of Illinois system, but from partners like the University of Chicago, Argonne, and Northwestern University, capitalize on their innovations. So this is about smart cities. One of the first things that I learned as a computer scientist interested in cities and started talking to people in the city of Chicago about 10 years ago about how we could use computer science capabilities and techniques to help cities deal with some of the challenges that they're dealing with. And one of the first lessons I learned is that cities are not homogeneous entities. They're really collections of neighborhoods. And any city would look like this in terms of heterogeneity that you see here, these different views of Chicago, some of which are legacy infrastructure like the access to services. That's a map showing the number of minutes by public transit it takes to get to the Chicago Loop, where as a proxy for where your job might be. And if you're in one of those green areas, it's a nice 30-minute trip by public transit. If you're in some of these other areas, not so much. So that translates to opportunity for jobs for you and people in your neighborhood, all due to the decisions that were made over the last century or so on public transit infrastructure. Those decisions also affect things like air quality. We tend to locate the warehouses and all the freight trucks coming in and out of those warehouses predominantly underrepresented, represented in under-resourced communities. And so they also suffer from higher rates of asthma, as you can see from the graph there. Something we don't really quite understand, not that we understand any of these factors as well as we would like, is why people age faster in some neighborhoods than others. And that translates to a life expectancy that is dramatically different, even if you look at the left there, between the Hyde Park neighborhood, which is where the University of Chicago is, and I think that is Woodlawn, might be Englewood, where there's a multi-decade difference in life expectancy. And that's a difference that is there even if you correct for crime or racially specific diseases. So there's a difference in life experience that translates to your life expectancy. On the far right, access to healthy food. You can also see that some neighborhoods, if you want food and you don't want to have to walk more than a mile to a grocery store with fresh produce, the only thing available to you is fast food. And so not surprisingly, this has an impact on health. So when we think about cities, we began to talk to different departments in the city of Chicago and different scientists around the Chicago area. And we found that all of them were trying to study cities, but they were trying to study cities with data that for the most part looked at the city as a big homogeneous thing. And so things like air quality, we have a half a dozen air quality measurement stations in a 600 square kilometer city. And there was a lack of information or data about what's happening in a given neighborhood. A neighborhood level measurement of air quality, for example, just wasn't possible, or noise or traffic flow. So this was the motivation behind us as computer scientists say, well, this is back in 2012. Well, let's see if we can design a sensor system that would bring not just scientists, but the general public more information about their city. Going beyond cities, I'm showing here that there's an issue with even in the Great Lakes region, where I am about 25 miles away from where I'm sitting from the continent's largest water supply. 21% of the fresh water on the planet is right next door. And yet, if you look at access to clean water, you can see in this graph, just think dark shaded is not good. You can see that clean water is not only an issue in the Great Lakes region, but if you dive into the data and sort of study this map, you'll see it's also a particularly difficult issue in communities that are under-resourced or people of color. So it isn't just in the cities where we see these challenges, but in entire regions. And so we set out with the Array of Things project to see what we could do in terms of measuring cities in a more in a way that gives us both spatial high resolution and temporal high resolution. Now, we in Chicago benefited from and still benefit from the mindset of the mayor's office in Chicago, both Rahm Emanuel, who came in 2011 when we were just starting up, and now Lori Lightwood, our current mayor. And both mayors, as well as here you see Mayor Khan from London, have seen technology as a way not just to make parking easier or things more efficient, but as a way to make the city, I'll just say, better in terms of life experience for the people that live there. So there's a real focus not on the technology as an end, but on the technology as a means to ends that are, to first order, not solvable through technologies, but could be the solutions, could be informed by things like data that we could glean from technology. So as I said in the abstract that Jay sort of put up there. I have sort of not used the smart city term very much in the last few years, in the last 10 years, because it's often been, I'll say, co-opted by technology vendors and defined around a product stream or a technical strategy rather than around the needs of people in cities. And so I think, just because you have technology in your city doesn't make it smart. I have a smart watch. It's not what makes me smart if I am smart. I have a smartphone. It doesn't necessarily make me smart. A smart person or in a smart city would look to the future, would plan, would think about the well-being of the people in its care or that it's involved with, would think about opportunity, economic opportunity, education opportunity, and of course would think about infrastructure. This graph, I really have liked this approach here. This was one that Arup developed in the Rockefeller 100 Resilient Cities program. We had a workshop with about 120 people from across every walk of life in Chicago as part of this project a few years ago. And the Arup folks showed this diagram. And I'll admit that I came in as a scientist thinking about resilience only in terms of the lower left side. Are we resilient to floods or urban heat island or what have you? So it kind of opened my eyes as a scientist to maybe things that are more obvious to folks in other fields. And I like to use this as a framework to ask the question: are we making our city smarter, or are we making our city better? Is maybe the more appropriate question. So what did we do with Array of Things? We engaged about 30 scientists from across the scientific disciplines, from climate science to transportation science, social and behavioral scientists. And we asked them through a series of workshops, if you could get more data about an urban area like Chicago, city like Chicago, what would, if you could put, more generally, if you could put a device out on 100 or 200 street corners, what would that device do to help you answer the questions you're trying to answer? A lot of the answers to that came in the way of, well, we would measure noise, we would measure vibration, or we would measure air quality on a neighborhood basis and try to compare that with traffic flow. There were some questions, though, that we couldn't really answer because with just electronic sensors, because you can't go to the store and buy an electronic sensor that says, tell me how many near-miss traffic collisions there were at this corner, or even the flow of traffic through the corner. You can get aggregate statistics, but there are many things that you can't sense. You have to observe with humans. And so we decided to put a camera on the device looking down, one looking up at the sky, and make a device that was remotely programmable. And so we came up with this notion of a software-defined sensor, borrowing that term loosely from a technology called software-defined radio, which is a radio that you program to act as a cellular phone or as a ham radio or as a walkie-talkie. And rather than the function of the radio being in the hardware, like your transistor radio, it's all in the hardware, there's no software. The function of the radio would be defined by the programs that it ran. And so we said, that's what we need. We need sensors that are defined by software that we can run and that we can push out after they're deployed, and we don't have to replace them if we decide, oh, we want to measure something else. And I'll come back to that, because we have ended up having to use this capability because we want to measure things that we never thought we would have to measure a couple of years ago. Some examples here. I know you can't read this, but Jay will have available the slides, and so you can look in more detail. But just to give you a sense for the distribution of the sensors around the city, they're typically 28 feet above the sidewalk with the camera pointed at the center of the intersection. They aren't all at intersections, but most of them are. Our primary partner for installation was the Chicago Department of Transportation, CDOT, and specifically their electrical operations folks that take care of the streetlights and other things. And so you see the Department of Public Health has got several projects that they've worked with us on. Pullman National Monument Preservation Society wanted to understand how designation as a national monument might affect traffic through the neighborhoods. There's a smart grid project there that ComEd is doing in the Bronzeville community. One of the early projects that we partnered with that represents 40 of the dots you see on the screen is the Vision Zero program, the very last bullet there. That's 10 departments and agencies, all of whom have been working together for the last couple of years with a goal of eliminating traffic-related fatalities. They don't talk about traffic accidents, they talk about collisions, and it's a safety program. And so they're very interested in not just the crashes that happen, but the ones that almost happen, these near misses. So they gave us the 40 intersections and corridors throughout Chicago that have the highest rates of, or highest number of fatalities. So as I mentioned, these are 28 feet off the ground. So the diagram here is not to scale, but the bottom camera is faced at the center of the intersection. You can see a couple of examples there. The bottom row of images with those colored are an example of the software that we are running to just count the number of vehicles and the number of pedestrians at the intersection. Inside the blue part of the box here are two microprocessors or single board computers, one of which is dedicated to analyzing the images. I don't have a specific slide on privacy, but this is one of the issues that was one that we wanted to hit head on at the very beginning of the project, to design the system to be, I would say, anti-surveillance and to be protective of the privacy of the people in Chicago. So we thought very carefully about the design of the hardware and the software so that it would actually be very difficult if there was a policy change. Like Charlie and his team go away, a new evil group comes in to run the Array of Things project. It would be very difficult for them to turn these devices into surveillance devices. And I would say at the moment, with all the smartphone technologies that we now have, if you wanted to surveil an individual or a neighborhood in any city, including Chicago, the Array of Things wouldn't help you very much. You'd be much better off breaking into people's smartphones and doing your surveillance that way. So we're not even that big of a target for privacy. Having said that, we developed some policies early on. We had a series of community meetings where we discussed what we thought would be good privacy policies, including accountability and transparency. And then we had a 6-month comment period during which the residents and other, actually didn't even have to be a resident of Chicago, people could weigh in on the policies, suggest changes, point out problems. And so we put the policies in place in the summer of 2016. We have not had to revisit them because we were trying to put in place a policy that was not technology driven. It was a policy that was more about operating procedures, irrespective of the technology. So I'll give you an example. So at the time that what you see here, a 5-megapixel camera, that's really not, in 2016 when these first went in, you really couldn't get a license plate from any of the images, even if it was a sort of full on. So you couldn't do license plate recognition, nor could you really do any sort of recognition of a face, right? So while that was true in 2015, it's not true today. So we had to do policies that assumed that the cameras could actually, get your fingerprint if you're hailing a cab. You've seen the recent improvements in cameras, and that there was a story not long ago about somebody walking out of the White House, and the reporters got a shot of the handwritten notes that the person was carrying. So we now have cameras that are very, very powerful. We didn't want that to be the technology to be what we based our privacy on. So in a nutshell, the privacy policy is that all of the images, and by the way, the sound, because we do have microphones, all of that data is processed within the box with approved algorithms that say, we're going to count the number of people, or we're going to count the number of times that the sound level goes above a certain sound pressure, which translates to, let's say, we'll just count the number of times that for more than 1 second, we go above 80 decibels. So that gets approved, it runs out in the box. And then once the image or the sound clip is analyzed, it's deleted. So we don't have this, 5 years worth of images and sound that are sitting in a secret database somewhere. Most of it is gone. There are images and there are sound clips that we do collect, roughly in interesting situations like a snowstorm, for example. We might turn on and say, hey, let's pull an image every 15 minutes for the next 6 hours from these nodes. Those images, which we classify as training images, are protected in a data system that requires approved access for a defined experiment and a signed data use agreement. So we've taken privacy very seriously in the project, as well as interaction with the community. You can imagine that early on people were asking, what are you going to do with those cameras? And so we feel that although privacy can always come up as an issue, we feel that part of the project has gone very well because of being proactive and transparent and really thinking about it as part of the design of the project. The other value, I'd say, of the project, which also comes from similar values that are embedded in the governance of the city of Chicago, is that this is data about the city, and so it should be free and open, not monetized. That isn't to say that somebody couldn't take the data and do something interesting with it and then sell what they've done. But it is to say that anyone who wants to get access to any data, that comes from the array of things, with the exception of the images and the sound, can go and they can download the data and they can analyze it. So we developed application programming interfaces as well as a download site so that you could interface this data with a portal. Like the upper right there, you see a portal called opengrid.io that we helped the city develop, that is a way to visualize data in an intuitive map form for residents. And that also means the application programming interfaces that you can develop tutorials or even applications that would use the data. So we had this mindset and this value of open and free data, and trying as best we could within the funding for this computer science experiment to make the data available in ways that make it legible to not just the scientists, but to the participants or residents of the city of Chicago. So I want to give you a couple of examples now, just turning specifically to the edge computing. By that, I just mean the computing happens out at the edge of the network rather than back in the cloud or the data center. This is an example here from Northern Illinois University. Mike Papka and a few of his colleagues there, another friend of Jay's, had used an array of things node on their campus to analyze the pedestrian behavior at this particular intersection. The blue is people coming in one direction, red is people going the other direction. And you see here that a number of pedestrians don't use the crosswalk. And so that's an interesting piece of data for Northern Illinois University as it thinks about traffic safety. So that's an example of just a simple edge computing capability that says, let's not just count the pedestrians, but let's recognize over time, looking at frame after frame, that this is the same pedestrian, and let's track their movement through this through the scene. Other projects at NIU that are on our website that you'll see at the end of the presentation have also looked at social distancing as another thing to measure. Now, other projects that are either in the process of ramping up to use array of things or are already doing it. On the right-hand side, we're already working with Exelon on a project that is taking data from these electrical power quality monitors and seeing what we can do to forecast outage or other kind of problem. On the right-hand side, the red dots of the city of Chicago map there, those are all of the flood complaints for a single year, 2004. And so it's, look at this as these are what you see annually in Chicago in terms of flooding damage. If you take hurricanes and wildfires off the table as the most expensive natural disasters that happen in the United States, what pops to the top is flooding in Chicago and in the Great Lakes region with the climate change and more frequent and more severe storms. So we've got some flooding experiments that are happening in the southern part of the city. That's one of the most troubled neighborhoods in terms of flooding. And in this case, as I'll show in a moment, we're using other sensors that are not Array of Things sensors that are sending moisture data into the Array of Things system. Two projects on the left that are in various stages of ramping up at O'Hare International Airport. The plan is to put several dozen of a new generation of Array of Things nodes in and around the airport to look at building a model, computer model, that would allow the city and its Department of Aviation and Transportation to look at incentives models and other methods that they might use to nudge more people onto public transit. The Blue Line train goes right into the airport, never even have to go outside, and it's consistently 45 minutes from downtown, no matter what the traffic is. So to nudge more people in the direction of public transit, the gloves are off with the Ubers and the Lyfts and the other transit companies. They are competing with public transit. And so this is a project that Department of Energy Vehicle Technology Office is funding at Argonne. Another project that we're working on with the Illinois Department of Transportation is if you look at a rail map of the U.S., you'll see Chicago is the hub of the rail network. That has consequences not just to congestion, moving things in and through, out of and through the Chicago transit hub, but also for pedestrians or for people driving on the street. An estimate of 2017 by the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning said that Chicago residents wasted $60 million worth of time sitting at grade crossings. So Illinois Department of Transportation would love to eliminate at-grade crossings, of course, but there are too many of them to ever do that. And so how do you prioritize if you have $1 billion to spend, and these are $60 million projects? Which 15 or 20 projects do you do across a city or an area like Chicago? So what they asked us to do was to use edge computing, place Array of Things devices, or actually the new version that I'll talk about called SAGE, place these at several at-grade crossings and then get statistics on not just how long did it take for the gate after it goes down to come back up again, but more importantly, how long until traffic returns to steady state? How many vehicles were caught in that crossing? What type of vehicles were they? How many emergency vehicles, public transit, delivery vehicles were? So getting a better understanding of the impact in a positive sense of making one of these at-grade crossings an over or an underpass. Some other examples here, I'll just talk about the two that are moving, and then there's one that will appear. The drone detection, something that we did a couple summers ago with the Air Force and the management group of Soldier Field, the football stadium in Chicago. And we determined that even with the relatively low powered computers that we have on the current and past Array of Things nodes, we could determine the difference between a bird, a plane, and a drone, and even with a low-res camera by the movement, even if we didn't know anything about the shape. So you'd think if I was trying to figure out, is that a drone or a bird or a plane, it would be, I'm looking at the shape. But even we as humans are also looking at the movement characteristics. And so it's those movement characteristics that allowed us to say that's a drone or a plane or a bird. Now in the upper right, you see for the last 18 months, we have actually the last 2 years, we have had one of the new devices that we've been designing up at the Argonne main gate and using that in a similar fashion to the pedestrian example to look at traffic coming in and out and see if we can not just determine the number of vehicles, but the make of the vehicle. So that would answer a question, for example, what's the penetration of electrical vehicles in this neighborhood? How many of the vehicles that we see, or here in the case of Argonne, how many vehicles do we see at Argonne that are electric versus diesel or standard gas? And the lower right there, I think all of us, other than the main Dread Pirate Roberts in Princess Bride, he was the only one that that predicted that in the future everyone would wear masks. We didn't certainly think when we put cameras up that we might want to detect the percentage of people that are wearing masks, and here we are. So this notion of a software-defined sensor means that we could just send a new program out to the edge and not have to put a new device up to count and to look at mask usage in public. So let me quickly take you through kind of the evolution of the platform, and then as I said, I want to try to leave some room for discussion, questions, and answers. As I mentioned, we started back in 2012. The first version of this that came out on the very left there was about 2013, 2014. We then worked with an industrial design company, learned a lot about the challenges of manufacturing, especially for a bespoke device like this. In the bottom there, you see this manager circuit board that we built because we didn't trust the single board computers circa 2015 or so to survive in the wide swings of temperature that you see outside. You know, whether it's going from 90 to 110 F in Austin, or going from 90 to minus 30 in Chicago, that temperature swing we thought would have its wear and tear on the single board computers. We wanted to be able to help them recover from software and hardware errors, and so we built this controller board. Fast forward to today. I'm going to skip this one for the moment. Fast forward to today, you see on the left the devices that we're building now and that will be mass produced for us starting in the spring. Everything that you see, with the exception of that familiar white piece on the left for the sensors, everything you see there is a commercial product, including the box. And every interface, unlike the old array of things nodes, there was a 23 wire umbilical cord between the processing boards inside the blue part into the sensor boards inside the white part. That now has given way to standard interfaces. And so there's actually a single board computer in the white part now that's talking to the processor over standard Ethernet. So all of the plugs on the bottom that you see of that box are standard commercial. What that means is that we can build this edge computing device with any set of sensors or communication technologies, or you see the cameras there that are commercial cameras, with any pieces that we or others want, without having to go back to the drawing board and have a new batch, change all the assembly manuals and have a new batch made for us. So the new project is called Sage. We're really focusing on being able to support a wide range of experiments. We are not a smart city company, and I'm not selling these devices commercially. We are supporting research, but we wanted to support a wide variety of devices. Let me go back one slide and talk about something else that I mentioned before that we thought was important enough to now make it part of the architecture of what we call the Waggle platform. And that is this notion of sensors that we don't necessarily build or deploy, these third-party sensors. We already have done this with the Airbox project in Taiwan. These are at Academia Sinica. These are air quality boxes. They have about 10,000 of them deployed around the island of Taiwan. And we've worked with them and their APIs, application programming interfaces, so that we could pull their data in and mix it with Array of Things data, because we wanted to use some of their devices, and we have about 20 of them in Chicago for some of our experiments. So we wanted this platform to be able to support devices that other people deploy. And the advantage to pulling data in from multiple projects is that the programming interface for the tutorials, for the data analytics, for the applications now can apply to data from outside of our system. So if somebody wants to build a third-party sensor network, but they don't want to do the heavy lifting of data management and application program interfaces, they can just send their data into the Waggle system and take advantage of that. All right, so that's the kind of evolution of the platform. That's all funded by a follow-on project. The original Array of Things project was a little over $3 million over 3 years to prototype a urban sensing system. The SAGE project, another project that I'm doing with Pete Beckman and several others, Pete leads this project. This project is 3 times larger, still a 3-year project. We're about halfway through. And it is to do all that I just talked about, this modular devices. You can see a commercial option that we've evaluated on the left there. All of that hardware design and the software, so that we are now at a point where if you go back to the Array of Things and if we said, hey, we want to detect face masks, somebody on our team had to write that software and put it into the devices. And it was a lot of manual intervention by somebody on our team. If Jay's team wanted to write something, it was possible, but it would require a lot of human interaction. The new system that NSF has funded us now, if Jay wants to come up with a new software-defined sensor, he can do that development in his condo, he can test it out, and then he can say, okay, this one's ready. We want to try it out on these 20 nodes over here or these over here. The other part of this SAGE project is now it's not just cities, but it's 2 other projects, one of which is called NEON, and the other is called HP-REN, or it's also, it's part of a project called Wi-Fi. NEON is a nationwide, you can see those blue circles are NEON sites that are these towers that exist. It's a $500 million NSF investment. Those towers are dumb sensor towers. We actually have our software running on Dell Edge computing devices. So I saw Dell was a sponsor. So Dell is actually running our software. We're running it on Dell hardware. So it's not just our own hardware that this runs on. And then Wi-Fi is in Southern California. It's a set of about 70 or so towers that are providing real-time camera and air quality to first responders. And the idea there is to use the cameras, intelligently process the images, and couple a wildfire that's being observed with a model of a wildfire in a supercomputer and try to give first responders some notion of where that wildfire might go over the next 20, 30, 40 minutes or a couple of hours. One more thing about this diagram here. This was our original proposal, and we were funded as a 3-year project to just prototype the cyber infrastructure. So our bigger vision here is to push this out to many more cities, as you see on the map here. I think we have Austin in there as a part of the Urban Wildlife Initiative, another one of the partners here, but we should probably have a red diamond there for Array of Things if we can get this other project funded in the next year or so. So let me close by talking about why this type of infrastructure is important, especially now. So here you see the hot and cold spots in Chicago of COVID-19. COVID-19 has particularly affected neighborhoods with people who are Black or brown. The only way that we can see a COVID-19 hotspot emerging or resurging is by looking at the test results of individuals. So what that means is that somebody gets infected, a few days later, if they have symptoms, they go and get tested, and a few days later, the test results are reported to the Department of Public Health. A week has gone by before we know that there's a hotspot emerging. What we've been doing in Chicago is sampling the sewers, and a lot of people are doing this on campuses and in cities. So we have a project funded by the Walder Foundation where we're doing weekly sampling, because once you're infected by COVID-19, it shows up in your waste almost immediately before you even have any symptoms or know that you're sick. And that's a week before, in some cases, 10 days before the public health department knows that there's an outbreak happening. So the purpose of this experimental project using manually sampled in the treatment plants and upstream in the sewers is to prototype a system that gives public health departments an early warning of a resurgence or a hotspot coming out, so they can mobilize testing units, they can mobilize uh, um, education programs and public awareness, hand out masks, et cetera, et cetera. So unfortunately, this doesn't have the infrastructure I just described because we don't have biosensors yet. So at the point that biosensors start to appear, which will be in between 1 and 3 years, they'll start coming out. There are already some early prototypes of biosensors. Then all of a sudden, this kind of edge infrastructure to make your city smart, you might start looking at what sensors we can put throughout our water systems, not just for the next COVID-21 or COVID-22, but even for looking at opioid abuse and seeing what's happening across the city for this or another emerging disease. So we think that this edge computing, making a city smarter, is not just about what we can sense today, but it's about building the underlying infrastructure that we'll need as better sensors become available. And here you can just see the process that we have undertaken with our project in partnership with the Chicago Department of Public Health. So I'm sorry we're at 12:49, so I hope to leave more time, but I'm going to stop here. And as I said, I can't see the chat, but I'll let Jay or one of his folks
Charlie, that was great. We're going to have a lot of questions, I think, and we may save some and send you some and share them to our Texas Smart Cities list afterwards. But let's ask a few real quick here. I did see a great question about from Daryl Highland of Rapid 7 Systems, and they do security testing of edge devices. Has any of your data ever been subpoenaed or requested by?
Very, very good question. No, and what we struggle with this in the privacy policy, and we decided at the end of the day that we would adopt the same policies of the University of Chicago with respect to the sensitive data that they hold because they run hospitals. And so if we were subpoenaed for any of the data, we would give the data. This is one of the reasons that the fact that we don't save all the data is a better protection for privacy, because if at some point there was a controlling authority that wanted to do surveillance, there's no big database that we have that they could use. We also, I'll say in our operating policies, we contemplated that we might be asked to do something that would violate our policies by someone who could make us do that. And we might be asked not to say anything about it. And so we said, when we do our annual report, we will report whether we've been asked to do anything, or I'll say we'll report that we haven't been asked. In the absence of that, we haven't been asked would effectively say we've been asked, but it's never come up.
That is great, thorough answer. You really did think through the security things up front, from community engagement to what you would do on the device to what you would save. Really appreciate that. Great lessons for other cities. Would like to take questions from the audience now. So let's go. And Daryl, sorry, I already asked yours because I wasn't sure how much time we've had, but.
Do you want people to come off of mute and ask, or do you want to have them put it in the chat?
I want they come off of mute and ask so we can get them.
Okay. How about Catherine? Yours popped up most as soon as I said that.
Hey, Charlie, this is Catherine Crago from the Housing Authority of the City of Austin. And I'm just wondering, what are the IoT kind of network reliability issues that you saw as you were working across neighborhoods that might have different network availability and usage? And did you have to change the technology at all because the throughput of the network was low, or maybe there were donut holes? And what are the solutions?
Good question, Catherine. So we use in the devices that are out there now, they're all of them are using 3G modems. Another protection against, if somebody wanted to start streaming, it would be awfully expensive and it wouldn't work very well with 3G. The new devices that we're building, and even the old devices, we are agnostic with respect to the type of network that's used. These are Linux devices, open operating system. And so if there's a device with a device driver, we can plug it in. And so we've had mesh network versions and Wi-Fi and direct Ethernet. In some of the challenges with IoT reliability, I would say a couple of things we ran into that maybe or maybe not, maybe should have or maybe shouldn't have surprised us. One was cellular coverage can vary, throughout the day and throughout the week. But for the most part, we had pretty solid cellular coverage. We went away from Wi-Fi even on the UChicago campus where there's ubiquitous Wi-Fi, just because Wi-Fi security is notoriously flaky, even for humans to figure out. And so we just said, it's simpler to do cellular. Power on the poles. Chicago is an old city. Some of the signal boxes, they don't make the technology anymore. They're like physical technologies from the 30s. And so the power, we did have quite a few issues with power outages, even though they weren't extended. So we had to do some work on making sure that our devices didn't get fried when there was a spike or that sort of thing. And then, there was the self-inflicted wounds, right? So on the one hand, we're building a very complex system to keep the system reliable. On the other hand, any mistake in the belts and suspenders, actually, as it got more complicated, it started to become a reliability issue itself. And so as we started to see that, we started also to say, well, we can now buy devices that are much more reliable. So we've backed away from doing our own controller hardware to say, so some issues just with keeping things simple.
Quickly, next question, Chelsea, you want to ask the next one?
Yeah. Hey, Charlie. Thanks so much. I really love hearing the update on your work and nice to see you. Thanks for joining us. My question is, you all have been kind of setting the benchmark, at least nationwide, for many, many years. And I know there are probably a lot of people on the call who are just kind of getting started with their smart cities or connected communities or, whatever word we want to use there, whether it's public sector or private sector. What advice do you have for them? If they're kind of at step zero to get to where you all are now, what are some of the initial steps they should be taking?
Chelsea, that's a good question. When we first had the idea of doing Array of Things, it was December of 2011. Mm-hmm. And it took,
that's awesome.
The first device didn't go up for almost 5 years. Mm-hmm. So I think in that period of time, a lot of that was getting funding to do things, but there was also quite a bit of relationship building that we had to do, not just with each of the agencies we work with, but there are 8 levels of management in the Department of Transportation in Chicago. And we have found over the years that each one of those layers is important, because if you have a problem with one layer, all of a sudden you lose your sort of advocacy. And then it's not that people don't want to work with us, but the day-to-day of being overworked in the Department of Transportation, for example, will no longer have it sort of like, I know my boss wants me to do this, and so we'll try to squeeze it in. And so it's really nothing to do with the people. So it's a city, people in cities are very busy. So relationship building. The other thing I would say, and we just went through this with a large NSF proposal in November and December, is it's not just what are your challenges that we might be able to solve. So it's a sort of like table stakes are that you don't have a hammer and looking for nails. Yeah. That's like a given. But there's also an issue of priorities and timing. And so what might be a fantastic big need that a city has, they may not be ready to deal with it for a variety of reasons at the moment. In our large project, we went to different cities and the planning agencies. And what we asked them was, what are your priorities over the next 3 to 5 years? And what are some of the initiatives that you are moving forward on? Mm-hmm. And those were the ones that we chose to say, okay, why don't we partner with you on that? So it was us following the priority and the timing of the city that has to also build on relationships. I think it was at South by Southwest Jay and I were in a workshop, and I said, I don't have a relationship with the city of Chicago. I have a relationship with people who work in the city of Chicago. It's a big difference. So, you know, we do have a contract with the city, and there are these MOUs and all that stuff, but MOUs are paper.
I so appreciate your answers. And I think there's always kind of this feeling like we have to do something right away, but the people part of it means the relationship piece of it. So I super
You have to be persistent. These things take a long time.
Yeah, thank you.
One of the reasons we have a persistent, regularly occurring smart city series now, in fact, to emphasize that need for persistence and constant infusion. I wanted to make sure Daryl Highland got a chance to say something I saw in the chat. Daryl, are you still here?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah. I threw it in the chat real quick there. Yeah, this was a really great presentation. I loved it. So my role here at Rapid7 is I basically run the research arm of IoT technology, which I also, over the last couple of years, one of the things we typically do as part of my role, besides helping my organization around IoT testing, building those methodologies and directions for our customers, I also run research projects that involve partnering with various organizations or businesses to actually test technology. I have a couple white papers going to be coming out this year on ones we've been working on last year. But basically what I'm saying is if you're interested in having your new technology, the whole end-to-end concept of it, test it from a security standpoint, we could probably work out some kind of a research partnership on that, which would basically give us a chance to give you a kind of a third-party look. It'd actually be me, a third-party look of the technology, examining it all the way from hardware all the way through some software level testing, externally RF testing, a little bit of everything, kind of the whole end-to-end security approach of examining an IoT technology. So something to think about there. And Jay can give you my contact information.
I'll connect you. And Charlie, I just want to say, Daryl has been super patient. Rapid7 has been waiting for us to get to the point you are. I'm glad Daryl is hanging around after this pandemic. I do think we'll finally have our first infrastructure out there, but take advantage of him and Rapid7. They're great. I'll connect you to after this. It is 12:59 and we try to end everything on time. So thank you everybody for attending this today. Charlie, thank you very much. We look forward to seeing everybody in 2 weeks with Jordan Davis and the Smart Columbus Project. Thanks, everyone.
Hi, Bill Boaz, Eric, and Will Engler. See you later.